I'll defer to either prosecutor for the state.
Thank you, Judge. Corey was a beautiful 6-year-old whose life was taken from him, and there's nothing that I am going to be able to say that is more important than the facts that came out in this courtroom, and more important as to what the defendant did. It is difficult to think about the suffering that Corey had to endure both during his life and during his death. It is difficult to contemplate the fear that he must have lived with every single day, doing the little things in life and even doing the simple things every time that he was with his father, the defendant. Christopher Gregor abused his son. He ended his life. And then he left him alone in the hospital to die. One can only imagine what was going through Corey's mind in those last moments. One could only imagine how scared he was, how confused that he was, how truly abandoned that he felt. And there is simply no mitigation for those actions. Aggravating factor number 1 applies. The defendant's actions were cruel and depraved beyond the elements of the offense. In regard to the endangering, Your Honor, Corey didn't merely run on a treadmill and fall. He fell, the defendant bit him on the head, and he fell 5 more times. In regard to the ending of his life, Corey suffered a laceration to his heart, but those were not the only injuries. He also had a lacerated liver and a bruise to his lungs. He suffered multiple injuries. While Corey was at the apartment, he vomited, he defecated, he endured suffering. While Corey was fighting for his life, the defendant took a selfie, not even having the decency to put a shirt on Corey. While Corey's body was shutting down, the defendant ordered food. When Corey was going into cardiac arrest, the defendant was more concerned about the date that he had set up for that night. The defendant didn't call 911, he didn't call a doctor, he didn't call an ambulance, he did nothing. And this added to the suffering that that little boy had to undergo. The defendant then throws Corey in the back seat of the car where he is left all alone. When the defendant gets to the hospital, he tells the staff not to contact Corey's mother. While he's on the phone with Corey's mother, he does not tell her where Corey is. Not only did he end Corey's life, but he took away his last moments that he had with his family. And there is no mitigation for that. Corey did not pass surrounded by those he loved, holding his hand, comforting him. He passed alone with strangers. Aggravating factor number 2 applies. Corey was particularly vulnerable and incapable of resistance. And this goes beyond the elements of the offense. It goes beyond the father and son relationship and the young age of Corey. the defendant abused Corey. He utilized this relationship of abuse to effectuate his crimes. He relied upon the fact that this little boy was scared and wasn't going to tell in order to do what he did. He was particularly vulnerable due to how little he was, due to the relationship and dominance and control, and also due to the fact that he did have learning disabilities and maybe couldn't communicate as well as others, especially at that age. Aggravating factor number 3 applies. There is a risk that the defendant will commit another offense, and the state asks that heavy weight be afforded to that factor. The defendant in this particular case was motivated by anger at Corey's mother, anger at the situation, and he punished Corey for this. And the rage that he displays shows us that he is a dangerous person with no impulse control, and he will commit more crimes. The defendant has shown a complete disregard for the law, for DCP&P, and the court system. The morning of Corey's death, the defendant called DCP&P, blaming others that he was not responsible for doing anything to Corey. But meanwhile, he was the only person who had been abusing him. He manipulated the system, and he used the system so he could effectuate his continued abuse and ended Corey's life. During the trial, he attempted to change his mother's testimony and referred to this trial as a game. Well, it's not a game. Corey's life was taken from him. The defendant has failed to take responsibility for his actions at the time of the offense, and anything that we see in court here today, the state submits, it is only for the benefit of the defendant. The only thing Christopher Gregor cares about is himself and self-preservation. When the defendant believed that Corey had passed and he leaves the hospital, he put as many miles between what he did as he possibly could, showing his failure to take responsibility and the fact that he will commit additional offenses. He only came back to New Jersey because he hadn't been charged, showing the fact that he will commit additional offenses. Aggravating factor number 9 applies, the need to deter, and the state submits that heavy weight should be given to this factor. It goes without saying, Your Honor, that it is society's greatest interest to protect its children. Simply, there is no society without children, without the next generation, and a sentence should be imposed to deter anyone from abusing, hurting, or ending a child's life. There are no mitigating factors. Defendant's argument that mitigating factor number 2 applies and that he did not contemplate that the conduct would cause or threaten serious harm is without merit. A jury listened to the evidence and concluded that the defendant caused Corey's death while manifesting an extreme indifference to the value of human life. Mitigating 7 does not apply. The defendant has not lived a law-abiding life. And while the state recognizes that he does not have any indictable superior court convictions, he has had contacts with the law for years in New Jersey in Maryland, in Florida, and Connecticut. Although any of these things individually may not mean a lot, when you look at them cumulatively, he has not lived a law-abiding life. Mitigating factor 8 does not apply. The defendant's conduct was the result of circumstances likely to reoccur. Defense attorney's argument in the sentencing memorandum somehow that Corey had an EEP and he was a new father, none of this shows mitigation. What it shows is a particular vulnerability of Corey. The state has also reviewed some of the letters that were submitted on the defendant's behalf, and the state submits that none of those letters show any type of mitigation. And there just seems to be a lack of concern or a disregard as to the facts that came out during the trial. And based on all of these things, Your Honor, the state is asking for the maximum sentence allowable under the law. I know that the victim's family is present and they would like to address the court.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And where would you like the victim's family to address the court from?
It's my understanding, Your Honor, that they are going to proceed up to the witness stand.
And I know we've had some people testify at trial, so obviously your full names were provided then, but if you qualify under the Victims' Rights Act, so you don't need to provide your full name. If you'd be more comfortable, you can just provide your first and last initial, but if you are comfortable providing your full name, then you're welcome to do that too. So Ms. Lento, I'll let you tell me who would like to come up first.
Your Honor, I believe that Corey's grandfather would first like to speak, and he would like to actually read a letter from Corey's aunt, if he may approach.
Hi, sir. Sure. Come on up. Thank you. Just watch your step.
All right, we're watching the sentencing of Christopher Gregor, who was convicted of manslaughter for the death of his son. Now, the prosecutor laid out a number of aggravating factors that they believe compel the maximum sentence in this case, including that the murder was cruel, that the defendant didn't do anything to stop it, that the victim was particularly vulnerable. And the prosecution also argued that there aren't any mitigating factors that would suggest a lesser sentence. So now that the prosecutor's done talking, we're going to hear from some family members. And after the break, we'll listen to the victim's grandfather, Vito Micciolo. Stay tuned for that.